Get me tell you something that might feel uncomfortable at first. You were taught your whole life that the more you try, the more you work. The more effort you put in, the more money you'll make. And it sounds logical, even obvious. But if you look at reality honestly, you'll see that it doesn't actually work that way. Look around. How many people are constantly working, pushing themselves, trying harder and harder, and yet their financial situation barely changes, or sometimes even gets worse. And at the same time, there are others who don't seem to struggle nearly as much. But money comes to them, opportunities appear, things just work out. So the real question is, if effort truly creates wealth, why does it work so inconsistently? And the answer might completely change the way you see everything. Effort by itself does not make you rich. In fact, most of the time, it keeps you exactly where you are, because it was never about how much you do. It has always been about the state you are acting from. Neville Goddard said something very simple, but very deep. You don't get what you do. You get what you are. And while it's easy to agree with this as an idea, if you look at your life, you'll notice that every result you have is a direct reflection of your internal state. And this is where it gets important, because most people use effort as a way to compensate for an inner feeling of lack. They feel like they don't have enough, and they try to work their way into having more. But reality does not respond to effort. It responds to your state. And if inside you there is a feeling of, I don't have enough, no matter how hard you work, you will only reinforce that feeling. And money will either not come, or it will come with struggle, and disappear just as quickly. Joseph Murphy wrote that the subconscious mind accepts what you feel to be true, not what you say, not what you try to force, but what feels like a fact within you. And if your internal truth is struggle, pressure, the need to try harder, then that becomes your normal. You get used to the idea that money equals effort. And even when an easier opportunity appears, you subconsciously reject it because it doesn't match your internal belief. Think about it. How many times have you chosen the harder path, even when there was an easier option, just because it felt more right? Because that's what you were taught. But the truth is, wealth has never been directly connected to effort. It is connected to allowance, to how much you allow yourself to have. There are people who work a lot, but it's natural for them. They don't do it from lack. They do it from abundance, and that's why money flows to them. And there are those who work a lot because they're afraid of not having enough, and that's exactly why they stay in that cycle. From the outside, it looks the same. The actions are similar, but the internal state is completely different, and that's what creates the result. There's another trap almost everyone falls into. The idea that first you need to earn money, and only then you can feel calm, secure, free. But in reality, it works the other way around. First the state, then the result. If you're waiting for money to feel abundance, you'll never get there, because you stay in a state of waiting, and waiting is absence. Neville often spoke about living from the end, not moving toward it. And this is the key, because when you're moving toward something, you're always in the process, always on the way, always not there yet. But when you live from it, you are already there, and your actions change. They're no longer forced, no longer driven by fear, no longer heavy. They become a natural expression of who you already are, and that's when effort stops feeling like struggle and becomes movement. And money starts coming differently, not through pressure, but through opportunities, ideas, connections, things you didn't even notice before, because you were too focused on effort. There's a very important thing to understand. Effort often creates an illusion of control. It feels like if you try harder, you're in charge. But in reality, you're trying to compensate for a lack of trust. You don't believe it can come easily. So you choose the hard way, because it gives you a sense that you're doing something. But that's the trap, because reality doesn't require struggle. It requires alignment. Alignment between what you feel and what you want to experience. And if you want money, but inside you feel lack, pressure, fear, you create contradiction. And no matter how much you try, that contradiction will always be stronger, and the result either won't come or won't stay. So start noticing from which state you act. When you work, is it from inspiration or from pressure? When you make decisions, is it from confidence or from fear? When you think about money, do you feel calm or tense? And be honest with yourself. This is where change begins, not by increasing effort, but by changing your state. And this might feel unusual, even uncomfortable, because you were taught the opposite. But if you look at people who truly have money, consistently, you'll notice something. They are not obsessed with effort. They are aligned with the result as something normal. For them, money is natural, not a struggle, not a goal, just a part of life. And that state creates everything else. So here's the real choice. Keep trying to work your way into wealth or shift your internal starting point. Because as long as you believe money comes from effort, you will create situations where you need to try harder, and it will feel logical, familiar, even right. But it won't take you where you want to go. If you truly want to change your financial reality, you need to stop reinforcing the old pattern and start creating a new one, where money is not a reward for struggle, but a reflection of your state. And this doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with one simple moment. When you catch yourself thinking, I need to try harder, pause, and ask yourself, am I acting from abundance or from lack? And if you answer honestly, you'll see the direction you're moving in, and step by step, you'll begin to shift, not through struggle, but through awareness. And that's when effort stops draining you and starts producing results without internal tension. If this resonates with you, write in the comments if you've noticed how the more you try, the harder it gets. And hit the like button so more people can see this, especially those who still believe they just need to work harder. And subscribe, because we're going deeper in the next videos into how reality actually works and why anything is possible. And remember, the most important thing, wealth is not the result of effort. It's the result of your state. And the moment you change your state, everything else begins to change. Because anything is possible.